Hello, my name is Daniel, and this is the Engineering Success Podcast, episode 40. Thank you so much for joining this week. I have a fun interview ahead that I am so excited to share. But before we do that, let's do our shout outs for this week. Shout out to John Ott for supporting the podcast. Thank you, John Ott, for being a top tier supporter of the Engineering Success Podcast. You too can join John Ott and be featured at the beginning of every single episode with your name, your company name, or any safe for work phrase you want me to say on the podcast by joining him and supporting us at Spotify for podcasters or on our Patreon. The links to both of those are in the show notes or in the description of the video that you're watching. But thank you, John Ott, for your support of the podcast. Um, Make sure to write in as well. Write into Daniel at engringsuccess.com. That's also the name of my website, engringsuccess.com. Engineering success, but ing success, just like it would show up in your course catalog. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We have a great interview coming up with Tyler Robbins. Tyler has had a really cool career progression. He has multiple degrees in engineering and master's degrees in engineering. That includes masters in engineering, and he has a really cool career progression in the field of vibrations. So it's a really natural career progression, moving from different roles, but staying in his niche. And I think that you guys will really enjoy his personality and his storytelling and the career progressions and the lessons and insights that he has to share from that. So I'll catch you on the other side of what I hope is an ad break, but I hope you enjoy the interview and I'll catch you on the back side. Right. Well, hi Tyler, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How are
Thank
you
you
doing?
so I'm great, man. It's been a lovely day. We just got back from our first hospital visit. We got to see where our baby is going to be born, which was kind of a
Oh,
surreal experience.
congrats.
Yeah, we got 1.5 months. We're due June 25th, so today's May 4th. So it's right around the corner. What were you up to today?
I was testing solar panels up in northern Texas for
Okay.
vibration.
That is awesome. As a person that is from northern Texas, I am extremely jealous of you being from the DFW area. When you mentioned that you'd be taking this call from DFW, I was so jealous. Though I know that you're from the Northeast, so maybe not as excited about being there and being away from your
Oh,
family as I am that you are there on my behalf.
well, it's the second week in a row that I've been in Texas. I was actually in southern Texas last week, also
Okay,
last minute testing.
where's that?
So, I was in what 2 hours south of San Antonio, like fairly
Okay.
close to the border.
Okay. Yeah. So, like, did you go through like Falfurrias and stuff like that down towards McAllen? Is that where were going?
I honestly don't recall. I got, I landed in San Antonio, drove 2 hours
Oh my
out in the middle
gosh.
of the desert. There's a little town where like they had a few hotels and the Hilton was like $300 a night. I was like, there's nothing else here. You can pay less if you're willing to go even deeper into the desert, into a
Yeah.
no-tell motel. And I was like, I'm fine, I'm good.
Yeah. As somebody that spent the last 7 years of my life in San Antonio, also jealous of you that I hope you had at least one breakfast taco while you were there. I hope.
I did not. It was long days, and where I was at, there wasn't much that wasn't like a McDonald's. So I usually a lot of these jobs, I'll go to like a grocery store and get a lot of
Really?
the local stuff. Yeah, I'll get like I like to go to Whole Foods actually and get like all like the local foods and
Yeah.
like hoard it and use my per diem to to buy
Yeah.
it and like eat out of it while I'm in the hotel.
Yeah. And
I
then
love
for
eating local if there's stuff. So.
yeah, no, that's I honestly respect that. So have you sampled an HEB yet, or is that just too foreign?
Oh, oh no, I've been to a handful. Yeah, yeah, no, totally. Have been. I got my last week. Every dinner except for the last dinner was from HEB. It wasn't too bad.
Yes.
I had
Yeah.
some sushi. It was great.
Oh my gosh. I'll have to tell my wife. She is obsessed with their sushi. Now that we're in New Orleans, we have this place called Rouse's, and we also have Whole Foods, but the HEB sushi is one of the things she misses the most. If you haven't tried it yet, you have to also try their house-made guac. It is so good. You get their
I did.
house-made chips. Yeah, you get their
Yeah,
house-made
no,
chips, you have
I
their
got their
house-made guac.
chips and their guac, and like the
Yeah.
first day I got there, I was like, man, what am I gonna eat? I was driving all day. I'm hot. Nothing
Yeah.
sounds good. I'm like, oh, guac and like
Perfect.
the cucumbers with like the pepper, the
Yeah.
lime and the
Yeah.
seasoning on it, and I think I got some roasted chicken.
Yeah.
It was yeah
That's awesome. Well, I know that this is the Engineering Success podcast, not the
yeah.
How Much Does
I was
Daniel
gonna say I could
Miss
talk about you
Texas
all day.
podcast. No, we could go for the full hour on that, but so we're here to talk
Yeah, sure.
engineering. So what
Yeah.
what we'll have played before we talked about this is I give an intro for you, but just let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
Where'd you go to school for engineering, and how'd you first get interested in engineering as a thing that you could possibly do with your life?
Oh, okay. So I went to Miami University in Ohio. I got a double degree in mechanical engineering and decision science, which is business statistics.
Okay.
I got interested in engineering in high school. I took like shop classes and whatnot. And generally speaking, I like to be a problem solver.
Yeah.
I like little puzzles, and engineering is just a bunch of little puzzles, or that add up to big puzzles.
Yeah.
So I mean, in high school, I took AP Physics and calculus from like the local university and whatnot. And engineering made a lot of sense. I at one point thought about being a doctor, and I thought that was going to be way too stressful. And I
Yeah.
don't like chemistry; it's way too messy. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Give me
totally
physics any
agree.
day.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Chemistry was like one of those classes that just, I mean, I loved my unit ops class. I love my mass and
Right.
materials balance class. I'm jealous of the people that get to do like unit operations and designing refineries and optimizing that kind of
Hmm.
stuff system wise. But I just couldn't. The idea of doing OChem was just impossible for me.
Oh
So
yeah,
I
no, absolutely.
Yeah. So you were one of those kids that did shop and that's kind of how you got that passion for
Oh
engineering. Did
yeah.
it start before high school? Was it like this childhood thing or did it really just kind of come to you when you were in high school?
So like I wasn't one of those guys that like took apart things and put them back together.
Me neither.
I
I only took them apart.
My
I never
dad.
actually put them back together.
There's a couple of things I took apart that never got back together.
Yeah.
But my dad was kind of like Mr. Fix It, like around the house.
Hmm.
He used tools. Like when I was very young, I remember I had like a little toolbox with tools in it, and actually like worked on stuff. And he made a bunch of our toys when we were younger. Um, so like the idea of like building things probably came from my dad.
Yeah.
And then I was in Boy Scouts, and also you build things and whittle things and all that other stuff. And then by the time high school came around, I was very big about taking a lot of electives, and I took
Hmm.
one of I took a CAD elective. I took I remember that one where you had to build like this like balsa wood structure, and
Okay.
it went around a pipe, and you had to
Uh,
put weights on top of it, and the teacher would roll a bowling ball down a ramp to strike your structure as you increase the weights. So like the winner was the person who had the most weight standing, even though the thing kept coming and hitting it to see which one wouldn't break.
yeah.
Um, Mine never broke.
And
I,
that's why
I
you
built
became
it
an
in so that
engineer.
it was. Yeah, it kind of I made it so that it would move when
Yeah.
the bowling ball hit it, and they ended up actually having somebody stand on it with all the weight and just kind of jump up and down before it actually gave way. So
Yeah. So that's really cool. So whenever you were looking for colleges and stuff, was it really important for you to find a school where you could do a lot of that hands-on stuff, or what was the kind of the decision factor from you going to the University of Miami, the one in Ohio, not the one in Florida that, but the one in Miami that Ben Roethlisberger went to?
right, so the one in Miami is actually older than the city of Miami, or at least the official city, because it was established when 1809, and the city of
Yeah.
Miami wasn't established until like 1850. Um, but yeah, no, they have a big axe to grind. So it's in Ohio.
Yeah.
Um, so so my dad was very passionate about making sure that we could drive safely.
Mm.
And I know sounds a little roundabout, but so he had a rule. We had to drive with him 3,000 miles in the car before we could drive by ourselves. And what's
Okay.
the best way to rack up those miles is to do like some road trips to look at colleges.
Yeah.
So Miami was close enough. I got in an early acceptance. It was ranked 15 um, in the nation for undergraduate, um, and for undergraduate program, and it had business as well. And I really wanted to double major in engineering and business. Miami had a program where you could actually go get a mechanical engineering degree and add like a couple more classes and get engineering management, and then a couple more classes and get engineering manufacturing, and that had no appeal to me whatsoever because I was like, no, like engineers teaching other engineers how to like read people, that seems like a horrible idea.
Yeah.
So I was like, no, I want to take the marketing classes, I want to take the management classes.
Yeah.
They try to, the accounting teacher really didn't like me because the second accounting two, finance, she was like, there's these tables that you have to look at to to do all these complex compounding things. I was like, actually, there's an equation for that. She's like, no, there isn't. I was like, yes, there is. It was in my engineering economics class. I go bring
Yeah.
the book in, and I
Yeah.
did.
With all
And
the
she's
charts and
like,
everything.
yeah, yeah. It's like, yeah, like this is the equation for this thing right here. Because she's like, you can only use it at the chart or use a computer, a
Mm.
calculator to calculate this. So like, nope, there's an equation for it. She's like, leave it to an engineer to like pull out the equation. I'm like, yeah, like why?
Mm.
How do you think they got the table? They just magically made it.
No, it
So
came
no,
from
so I really
somewhere.
it came from somewhere, and I really wanted to double major in business because I knew myself, and I knew that if I was just engineering all the
Hmm.
time, I would go crazy. Like I
Hmm.
needed to kind of like take these, even when I was in high school, I took like electives at like creative writing classes and such just to kind of balance myself out. And I thought about going to Rose Holman in Indiana, which had the top master undergraduate program in the nation, I think, at the time. And this guy, the principal was just, I asked like, hey, like, could I, double major here, or like get this here, and like one of the local universities pair with it to get business because I really want to do this thing. And he said, why would you do that? You should just get a master's. I ended up getting my master's, but
Mm.
that's besides the point.
Yeah.
But I was listening in on his. It was a very small school. Like only 10% were like women, and which is fine. But it's just like a lot of guys, and it's
Yeah.
very small, like idea. And he was talking to this girl, and she's like, "Are you still dating that guy from Purdue?" She's like, "Yeah, but he's not an engineer." She's like, "Oh, you're not dating an engineer?" I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm like, this is too small. I don't know. I can only handle so much engineering. My wife is a social worker. Like, I have a lot of like squishy
Yeah.
scientists around me because there's only so
Yeah.
much that because like you get in an argument and it never ends. Like
Yeah.
you could go down these rabbit holes. Um, so like I went to Miami. I really liked the campus. The program was really, you suited me. They had just started really building up their mechanical engineering and other programs because they were really big in paper engineering. Um,
Paper?
and yeah, paper engineering.
Cool.
They paper bills and such that they were that was a really big claim to fame. And then about the year I started, or the year right before I started, they really started to ramp up offering more classes and more semesters, and kind of diversifying what they offered, what degrees they offered.
That's
And that's
cool.
actually where I met. Yeah.
That's what you met your wife?
Well, no, I didn't meet my wife until years later. But no, I did. There's a professor there who's now like a dean,
Yeah.
um, who vibration engineering. It was the first time it was offered in the spring. And I please stop me if I ramble too much. I have ADHD. I have a
You're
tendency to
not
just kind of like.
rambling. I will
Okay,
I
great.
will pull in the reins whenever I need to. Don't
All
worry.
right, perfect. Yeah. All right. So I can wax on poetically. But anyway, so this professor, it was the first time that the vibration class was offered in the spring. It's normally offered in the fall, and like it started off with like lower than usual number of students. Like is like 15 people signed up for this class.
Yeah.
And within a week, there were 6 people. And within a month, there were
Mm,
only 3 people in this class. And this is the first time this professor had taught at the school. It was
no.
it was my favorite class ever. Like, it
Oh,
was challenging. Like he took us out to dinner with his family because it's only 3 people in the class. So like we went out to dinner with his family and Indian food. He showed us how to order. Like the last week of class, like we all met at a coffee shop. Engineers meeting at a coffee shop is just kind of interesting. Um, but no, I really liked the class. I really liked the information, and then I did research for him for like the next 2 years. And because I did research for him there, I know eventually when I talk about grad school, that was about the time that the 2008 recession was kicking in, and I was
yeah.
like, well, I could go to grad school and have somebody else pay for it by doing research for them and make 20% more than I would with a bachelor's, which has
Yeah.
been very accurate. Or
Really
I could start,
nice.
yeah, no, yeah, consistently. Like, oh, you have a master's degree. We have to pay you more. I'm like, yes, thank you.
Nice.
Um, well, but historically, they say that if you start your career in a recession, then you usually end up making 20% less because you
Yeah.
start off at a lower pay rate. So every
Hmm.
raise that you get is based off of that first pay rate.
Yeah.
Um, maybe a little less now that there are certain states that say that companies can't ask you what your current income is because
Yeah.
they go, oh well, you're making this, we only have to offer you X amount in order to be more than what you're making. So I was like, oh well, if they will take me and you know I can have them pay for it, then I'll end up ahead.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. A professor at Purdue was a friend of a professor at Miami that I was friendly with. That I impressed in his classes. I did research for him for 3 years. I was on one project, and then that project lost funding, and I switched over to another project. Um, and then I got a master's in mechanical engineering with a focus in vibration analysis. And
Nice.
that's what I've
What
been
you
doing
do.
ever since. I'm a noise vibration engineer. Um, so when I was thinking about this podcast, and I was like, oh, if I had one piece of advice, what
Yeah.
would it be? And I know I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but this is relevant here.
It's your
Um,
show, man.
yeah, all right. Uh,
I'm just here to
I'm
help you tell your story.
I've been out in the sun all day, testing, panels,
Yeah.
driving through Dallas, so I'm just, I just had some delicious Thai food, so I am set. But the thing I thought was, if you want to be an engineer with the title of engineer, you want to do like engineering work rather than compared to, business or project management. I highly recommend specializing.
Hmm.
So, because I got a master's in mechanical engineering with a focus in vibration analysis, that gave me a tool belt that said, hey, I can apply that same information and technique to cars. So, I worked
Hmm.
for Nissan for 4 or 5 years doing noise vibration analysis on cars. And there was stuff that I knew that my fellow engineers at Nissan didn't know because I had a different tool belt. They were trained internally, so like, oh, this is vibration related to cars. This is powertrain. This is da da da, and it's all very relevant. But because I had the theory behind it, and go,
Hmm.
oh, but we could run this test, or we could look at it this way and kind of flip it on its head a little bit.
Yeah.
After
So you
Nissan, I worked at yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
so you'd say that that if you really want to do R&D and you really want to do design, you specialize, and the way you specialize is by getting a master's.
Yeah, yeah. So, so it doesn't have to be with a master's. You could, undergrad if you decide to go into, get hired on, right?
Hmm.
There are people that get mechanical engineering and go into mechanism design, right? So they didn't have to necessarily get a master's in mechanism design, but they focused their career path on
Yeah.
mechanism design.
Yeah.
And because you have this specialized focus and you become specialized, it becomes very easy to like go, I want this job or not that job. And it also becomes very easy to say, hey, I am worth being paid for this very special thing because there's not that many people that do what I do,
Exactly.
and it can apply it to a wide range of things rather than a very narrow field. Now, there's nothing wrong with not being specialized. If you like project management,
Yeah.
great. I don't. I hate it. I, I was like, I don't want to be a manager. It's been, it's like at all. Like, I want to be the, material expert, not the
Yeah.
manager.
Yeah.
Like that is the career the path that I'd want. But if you want to be a manager, if you want to be a project manager, or anything along those lines, general engineering is great
Yeah.
because you have enough information to like make an informed decision and have intelligent conversations, but you're not like digging into like oh well, let me know what this this fourth order equation is telling me, or like hey, that really weird software that you're looking at, you know can I know all the ins and out of that. No, you don't necessarily need that.
Yeah.
I and you were talking earlier about how like um you haven't listed as engineer. You've done a lot of other things. And I
Yeah.
knew a guy in undergrad who's like, I'm getting an mechanical engineer. He was great. Like I had him in a lot of my classes. We both were like at top of the classes. It was really funny. Like oftentimes he'd start at the top and I'd start like in the middle, and by the end we kind of flip flop. You know, but he specifically went into engineering, but planned on going into business. Like he was like, I want the engineering degree because I want to be like it's the thinking, the way of thinking about problems
Yeah.
and dissecting them, going through them, that I want to train my brain and to be trained in doing. Um, so yeah, so that's my advice. Like if you want, not necessarily R&D, but like if you like, hey, I have a passion for fluid mechanics,
Yeah.
then go follow that, and then it'll be very easy later on, especially if you're willing to move, to find jobs that fit that, because especially when you get into these um, in this world of computers, the things that are less electronic, vibrations, fluids, mechanisms. Those things are kind of hard to
Yeah.
kind of pull out. The things that just can't be done by the computer itself. And I thoroughly love I love test engineering because I'm not behind a computer all day. When I was at Nissan, I drove the cars on their track. The largest test track in North America is in Arizona, and I part of my day was driving cars and listening for noise and vibration and running tests. I worked at Stanley Black and Decker for 4 to 5 years, and a big part of my job was using power tools.
It's
you
so
know,
fun.
yeah, and I didn't get a free Nissan, but I got a bunch of free tools, prototypes and whatnot that they're like, hey, we're gonna just throw this away. Do you want it? I'm like, yeah, yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, I love that you spelled that out really well because exactly it's exact. I think it's completely true. I perfectly identify with your friend. I'm the person that has never ever felt inspired to do engineering design in his life. Well,
Mhm.
okay, there's like a short period of time where I wanted to design golf clubs, but then Nike went out of business in Fort Worth, and then they're like, oh, you have to all the golf club manufacturers are in California, and I was like, I don't want to go there, um, so I was done with my design aspirations, and it's like, okay, let's go the business route. But I think it is a really good point that if you want to do design, then you create that value, right? You build that niche, and for you, it
Mhm.
was by going the master's route, and so I do want to dig into that though. So
Yeah, yeah,
you
absolutely.
got the master's, you did your research. You've answered almost all my questions in the school section, but I do have one I'll pull out. So
Sure.
how much of whenever you did your first role coming out, how much of the stuff you were doing was stuff that you learned in your masters, and how much of that stuff was more things that you still had to learn on the job, even though you had the masters and the specialty and the research experience?
It's a good question, and I would say also like, how much engineering do you actually use from schools? Because I would say that like maybe 60%, 70% isn't used. Like you're like, oh, I
Hmm.
know these equations, I know this stuff. and the it's not that you're not going to write out those equations. If you're designing, you're running tests. Like there are certain people that do, but especially with computers now, like you
Yeah.
don't need to have like to know everything. But
Hmm.
what you do need to have is an understanding of what is affecting what. Like, oh, I might not remember that equation, but I remember that there is an equation, and I
Yeah.
remember that I can go look that up and go, okay, this is how this affects it. So the first job I had out of my master's, which was a real job because the first job I had was a contract engineering job that lasted like 3 months, um, and I took it purely because I needed a job, and I was like, I'm going to keep looking.
Yeah.
It was up in Rockford, Illinois, which at that point in time was like the ninth or 10th worst city in the United States, the former
Oh,
shoe capital of the world. Yes, it
really?
was. It
They're
was.
not going to
Yeah, it
sponsor
was.
the
It was.
podcast after you say stuff like that about them.
Oh, it was. I would say that was what the ranking was. I thought Rockford was absolutely lovely.
Thank you.
It had a bad rap. Um, but no. So the first like real job I had out of it was Nissan, and the vibration stuff I applied right away from
Hmm.
between research and grad school, like the maybe not like the shell theory of how to like calculate the vibration of a shell, but
Hmm.
like the signal processing and the modal analysis and the hands-on stuff immediately made sense.
Yeah.
But what I didn't know was cars, because even though I worked at Nissan for 4 to 5 years, I was not a car guy. Like I was surrounded by
No.
car guys who were like, "Oh, like look at this thing, and this engine, and and like, yeah, yeah." Um, I could feel the vibration in the steering wheel. Like, um, so like I could, I had to learn, like what tests they did,
Yeah.
what they were looking for, some of the things that were, you know, particular to Nissan, metrics that they had developed.
Hmm.
Um, and then also, like with most things, when it comes to vibration, it's very specific to that particular thing. So, like if you have a V8, an eight-cylinder car versus a four-cylinder, you're going to get a different response. So,
Hmm.
like knowing what questions to ask, what am I looking for? Is it does it have gears that it's shifting between, or is it a variable transmission? You know, um, so those things were things I had to learn, but they were very specific to whatever problem I was working on. So I
Yeah.
could ask those questions, and I had no problems asking questions. And I think it's very important to be able to ask questions and be okay looking like an idiot. Not like an
Yeah.
idiot, but just like you're like, I don't know. I'm genuinely coming in. I don't know what this thing is, but I know this other stuff.
Yeah.
So can you help me fill in my knowledge where my knowledge gap is?
Yeah.
Um,
So it got you close.
but
It,
no,
it it got you
it,
close.
oh, get me really close. But I will say that like the most effective class I had, besides the research did a lot because it was hands on. Like the stuff that, so I went from hands on research to hands on real world testing. So like it was directly applicable. But digital signal processing, which was my
Nice.
least favorite class in grad school, was probably the most beneficial class I had as in grad school. Um, which
Yeah,
is
because you,
really
you gotta get your
frustrating.
you gotta get your you gotta get your test input. You gotta get your test outputs and collect them somehow, right?
Oh yeah, no, like it was it's not just that. It's like how you're processing and kind of understanding like what the, because like that's, I don't know. Oh, well, you might not know this, but
I
most
don't.
engineering software um, is so unbelievably dated.
Oh
Like
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. It's like built in like 90 Windows 97 or something like that.
Windows 97, most of them are still like Windows, pull down, menus to pull down menus. You have to look for things. Sometimes like you're running something in like one software call it one thing and another software call it another thing. So like going, okay, I know what an auto power spectrum is. So if you're going to call an SXX or a GXX, I don't care. I know what it is, and that means like if I need it, I can look for it. So a lot of times, from my perspective, um, like the software is really helpful, but because I had the educational background, I knew what I was looking for, right? So like if
Yeah.
somebody didn't know what they were looking for, there's like, huge chunks of the software that would just go unused because
Hmm.
they didn't know that there was these things that were capable. So I always make it a big habit of like calling whoever, whatever software we're using, like, hey, I have a question. And I just get really buddy buddy with whoever our software person that we're using is, and be like, hey, like I have a question about this, and I have a question
Yeah.
about that, and they'll send you these, seminars and whatnot. And sometimes that's helpful, but sometimes I just like to bug them until they're like, yeah, yeah. And sometimes they're like, we can't do that. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, like it's a very specific niche that you're asking about, Tyler. Like there's maybe 100 people in the world that would want to do this at all.
Yeah.
So we didn't make a special app for that, but we can show you how we would do it if we did.
And I've been giggling this entire time because whenever I had my first like engineering internship, I worked on a software that was on a computer that was from 1997, and it was like it was the slowest machine ever, and they couldn't replace it because they needed it to run that one software, and I just happened to be the person that had to operate that machine and that software. It was the worst
Oh,
thing ever. But so
it
I
is it is
sympathize for the people you're
extremely
working
bad.
with. I sympathize with the people you're working with. So generally, it sounds like your master's. I mean, you needed it obviously, and
Right,
it was one of those things where it wasn't everything. You obviously had to learn some stuff on the job, but your
right.
education really prepared you well for your career.
Agree.
Yeah.
I think it did. And just I don't know if you know, but in terms of engineering masters, you have the class only option where you could take, just like you're in grad school, undergrad, you take a bunch of classes, you get credits, and then once you hit like a certain number of credits, you're done.
Hmm.
And then you have the research route, and I went the research route. So like I only had to take
Cool.
like 8 or 9 classes, and then I did a bunch of research. Um, and like the classes were helpful, but the research is what I think really prepared me um, for all the jobs I've had.
Yeah. So your situation for picking a master's, and I'm going off the beaten path really far. I
Oh
think
yeah,
that
no,
we're
sure.
going in the direction that questions have not even been written down or contemplated. But I know that your situation for picking a master's was driven by, in many ways, like you said, the economy. So what about for people now that are trying to make that decision? What would you say that they'd need to know, or where their head would need to be at, or their aspirations need to be in order to really for it to be worthwhile for them to take the master's route? Or are you just like everybody should?
So I don't think that everybody should. I honestly, I don't know that I should have. I did.
Come
By the time I
on.
graduated from, by the time I graduated from undergrad, I had over 220 credits. I did like an average of 18 or 19 credits a semester for 5 years. Um, so when I went to my master's, I was feeling a little burnt out. And I didn't quite realize just that that's how I was feeling. So like, I'm glad that I did, but at the same time, uh, I was kind of hoping that I wouldn't get into my master's program and was gonna be like, hey, I'm gonna go learn welding for a little bit. That sounds like a good idea. Like I'll learn how to weld, and just kind of do that for a little bit, so I don't like let my brain kind of, you know, deflate a little bit and kind of, let the, kind of chill out for a little bit. Didn't happen. Right now, I would say that we're kind of heading in the same place where the economy is kind of doing some weird stuff,
Yeah.
and I say that one, if you're going to go for your master's, and make sure that you are doing something that you like
Yeah.
and that you specialize. So like getting a general electrical engineering master's or general mechanical engineering where you take a bunch of different mechanical engineering classes, I don't think it's going to give you a whole bunch of benefit. Like going that general route for your master's. For undergrad, absolutely, but for masters, focusing on something specific that you're interested in and just kind of digging in, I think it'd be very helpful. Especially because if you find something that you like, odds are you'll find a professor that's doing research related to that. And if
Mhm.
they're doing research related for that, they will pay for you to go get your master's. So
Yeah.
like I took out some loans, very
Yeah.
little loans for my master's. Um, Basically just to kind of pay for my living, pay off my car, pay for my rent. But the classes were paid for. The university was paid for, and I even
Nice.
had like a small stipend. So like, yeah, no, I came out really nice. So if you are going for your master's, I highly recommend finding something that you like, and find a professor that's doing research in that field, and they're doing research in that field. They have funding, and they have to pay somebody to do the stuff that they don't have the time to do or they don't really want to do.
Yeah.
The
That, that
the manual labor stuff.
That's great guidelines. I think that that lines up exactly with the kind of the general principles that I kind of think of whenever I talk to people that are considering going that route. And I think that the funding is the expectation and the norm, not the exception, right? It's generally the
Absolutely.
expectation. Yeah. So if you're in that situation, listening to this podcast, I mean, really funding is important, and especially the other thing to consider is that that's 2 more years that you're not earning your full-time engineering salary and getting promotions and getting merit increases. You got to factor that in. So you definitely, even though he said you make 20% more, you definitely don't want to pile up the
It's
debt while you're
delayed.
doing that.
Oh,
Exactly. And it's
oh,
delayed.
absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Oh,
so you talked a little bit about we'll kind of close out the college kind of questions here. You talked a little bit
sure.
about that double major. Have you used it? Has it done anything for you in your career, or the lessons that you learned while doing it? What has it tangibly done for you?
So my foot. Right, so I am,
Decision
like I
science.
mentioned, this is well. So I was gonna say I'm kind of odd in
Yeah.
that if Miami University had it had a minor in creative writing, I would have also gotten a minor in creative writing because I took a bunch of like poetry classes and short story classes. Like this is, I'm kind of weird for an engineer. I think.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so I would say that the writing that I did helps with writing anything else because I'm very careful with my words when I'm writing it down.
Yeah.
Um, from the perspective of business, I think that it has helped.
Mm.
Um, there are two tangible things that kind of come up that I can point to. One, decision science is basically business statistics. So I took a bunch of statistics classes. I understand a little bit of sampling. There's been and I took a couple of higher level statistics classes when I went and got my master's to kind of continue that idea. And there have been many times where I've been like, oh, we're taking this data. This is not my standard data. This is survey data, or this is sampling that we're looking at. We need to apply a statistical analysis here. We can use some software that does some of it so that I don't have to kind of pull out every textbook I've ever looked at and kind of dig through it. But I know enough to go, hey, this is something that we need to go into. And like once I start reading up, I'm like, okay, yeah. So oftentimes I will be the person in the conversation going, okay, that's not really how you use statistics, or like, hey, like this is a better way that we can say with some certainty whether or not what we're saying is true,
Which
statistically
is
speaking.
important. Which is
Um,
really important.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I went to Miami was I really like the idea of this business statistics class, major. They no longer offer it, by the way. They actually stopped offering the major after I started it, and now it's only a minor, which is really unfortunate. Um,
Mm.
the other thing, I mean, I had like marketing classes and management classes, and I think some of that kind of seeped into like my general knowledge of things. But I had to take an engineering capstone class, which lasted 2 semesters. But I also had to take a business capstone class because they were in two different colleges at the university.
Okay.
And this, I keep referencing this capstone class, which is really unfortunate because they're at the time I was just like, ah, this teacher just doesn't know it. Yeah, like it just this is the easiest thing ever. My engineering capstone class is rough, not horrible. It's just really a lot of time consuming. And this class I could just kind of skate by. But it was a lot of case studies, and one of the case studies that keeps coming up over and over again is Wendy's. Um, Do you know about Wendy's chili?
I don't know about Wendy's chili. I only know about Kevin's chili from The Office. So please enlighten me on Wendy's chili.
I so and like yeah. So Wendy's has chili, and they
Okay.
have a CEO that this new CEO comes in. He's like, this chili's not making any money. Like it's maybe making like 2 or 3 cents profit per cup of chili. Yeah, it's
Okay.
not a huge profit maker. Why do we even have the chili? We're going to cancel the chili. We don't need to sell chili anymore at Wendy's. And shortly after, they see a huge loss because the way that they make Wendy's chilies is that, or at least they were, is that they wanted to make fresh burgers. And the way that they make fresh burgers is they throw them on and wait for you to come in. They don't wait for you to come in and then throw them on. They throw them on, wait for you to come in. And if it's been on there for a certain amount of time, they take the hamburger that's been on the grill for a little too long and they throw it into the chili. So they
Wow.
made profit off of something that they were going to throw away. So now, like even if it's just a couple cents, they're making money off of something they would have lost rather than just losing that money completely.
Okay. I see where you're going
So they
here.
bring back so they bring back the chili. So there's and the reason why I bring this up, and this is something that there's a couple other case studies in this class that were I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it just keeps coming up. But there in business, there are oftentimes the chili that you don't realize is there. Case in point, Nissan has the Titan, which is a large their largest truck, and they did a study and said, hey, people don't usually buy the Titan as their first truck. They'll buy it as if they already own an F-250, then they'll buy a Titan. But a lot of people come in thinking they want a Titan, and then they go, "Oh God, that's too big," and they buy a Frontier. So even though they don't sell a bunch of these, they make enough money off the ones they do sell, and they sell more Frontiers because they're selling the Titan. If they didn't sell the Titan, those people wouldn't come in to look at it, go, "That's too big. Let me get the smaller version." Um,
Okay.
the job that I'm currently at, we do a lot of consulting, and the test department is very small. There's only a handful of engineers. We are the largest reseller of or retailer of ANSYS software, and we have a whole simulation team that like trains people and simulates for everybody. Simulates for the customer, run simulations and whatnot. And the test department is kind of like Wendy's Chili, in that a lot of times we might get a phone call going, "Hey, can you run this test? Because we need to run this test, or we can't figure out what's going on." And then we go and we run, we run some tests. We're like, "Oh, by the way, we can take this data that we have and we can apply the, simulations." Or it works the other way where simulation says, "Hey, we might need some extra data. Let's get the test guys in, the testing people, feedback into simulation, and we get to get more business because of the testing that we do." So even though from a pure numbers situation, um, the test department probably brings in less money than the other departments. The fact that there is a test department
Yeah.
feeds in a lot more than sometimes it's even hard, it's even quantifiable. So this is something that's just kind of from a life perspective. There are times that it's difficult to quantify things, but it's not necessarily means that you can just get rid of it or that it's worth getting rid of. Like, because if you remove it, then you're like, oh wait, that was actually that was doing something pretty important. So yes, the
Yeah.
business degree does apply, but more in a larger philosophical perspective, probably.
No, that makes sense, man. I mean, I work for a large EPC contractor, and we have our maintenance group and our turnarounds group and our engineering consulting arm, and none of those arms have the same kind of margins and opportunities for making money as our EPC arm. But if we didn't have those, we wouldn't have those engineering opportunities that turn into mid-cap or small turnaround jobs or turn into large EPC projects. I mean, the little things that are your sometimes even your loss leaders generate the winners in the other parts of your organization. And it's nice that you're able to use that argument to feel really good about what you do and also maybe justify it to the people that you work up to. I'm sure that they're smart enough to figure it out themselves. So yeah,
Oh yeah.
that's really cool.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I would say that like the test department in most companies, a lot of people don't understand what they do. When I was working at Black and Decker, I based all my customers were internal customers, and I had to go around to all the testing, all not the project teams, and be like, "Hey, tell me about what problems you're having, because I might be able
Mhm.
to fix it." Because they didn't quite understand what we do, and it's really hard to quantify. Like, hey, if I'm doing my job right, then you don't actually know that I'm doing my job
Yeah.
because that means that you don't have any problems.
Yeah.
No, your warranty problems aren't really coming up. Like that loud noise that I heard, on the prototype didn't make it to market, so nobody's complaining about it. So it's yeah, random
Yeah.
thought. So
It's a good thought. So we've kind of mentioned a lot of different roles. So if you're
mhm.
game, I'd kind of like
Yeah,
to walk through your career progression and kind of get some
sure.
insights and lessons learned. So you came out of school, you got a contract engineering job just to get a job, and then fast forward, you're at Nissan. And at
hmm
Nissan, as you talked about earlier, that's where you really got to kind of apply your masters and all your studies
hmm
and vibration. What was your biggest takeaway from your time working as a noise and vibration test engineer with Nissan?
I mean, the biggest thing that the first thing that comes to my mind is that what I learned in my master's can be applied to anything. That was kind of
Yeah.
the takeaway. Like, um, so I was an oddball at Nissan because I was the only one with a master's in vibration analysis. But I also had the largest number of programs. So like I had everything from like small cars to large trucks. Like, the shortest guy on the team had to scrabble up into the large trucks. Yeah. So like what I learned from there was it's just like it could be applied to everything and how it's okay to there's this concept that I learned from my wife, the term I learned from my wife, which is object permanence. Are you familiar with this idea?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
familiar with the fact that some animals don't have it, or a lot of animals don't have it. So, but I know I have it.
No, not object permanence. Functional fixedness. Sorry, functional
Sorry.
fixedness. Are you familiar with that term?
No, I'm not familiar with that one. I
Okay,
know that my
okay, okay. All right.
dogs don't
So
have
sorry.
object permanence, despite me thinking sometimes that they do, but I don't know what functional, whatever the
Function,
hootie who,
functional
whatever you
fix,
just said.
functional fixedness is um, that every object has a function, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at a chair, you sit in the chair, but the chair could be turned into a fort if you were a little kid, right? Or it could turn into a step stool if you wanted to step on it and climb into something. Um, so like you have a screwdriver. The screwdriver is used to turn screws, but it can also be used as to create mechanical advantage. Um, so what I learned at Nissan was that like the tools that I had developed in grad school can be used in different ways, and that I don't necessarily have to do it in this one prescribed way, and that I also learned how to talk to other engineers. So like working with CAE, computer aided engineering, FEA guys, and kind of explaining, hey, this is the test side, you have the simulation side. Let's have a conversation. I got really good at communicating with my colleagues in Mexico and in Japan. Oftentimes we'd have like a three-way call where we're all speaking English. So that was kind of fun. But I also learned how to navigate the corporate world. I got really good. So like one of the jobs that the guys down in Mexico were tasked with is that they wanted to remove things. Okay, so you had countermeasures like hey, this thing made a noise. We put this thing on it. It no longer makes that noise. And they're like, hey, that thing costs 10 cents. I'd like to remove it so that we can save 10 cents per car. Yeah, later on. So it was never any safety things, but my recommendation to everybody is if you're going to buy a car, buy it the second year it comes out. First year, they're still trying to figure out the bugs, and after the second year, they try to cost reduce everything that they did to fix the bugs from the first year. So I learned that too. But so a lot of times I learned, hey, if they're asking to remove things, and I had to be firm and say, hey, no, you can't remove that, or like you can't ask me to remove one thing at a time, and it'd be like a death by a thousand paper cuts. Like, give me a list of
Yeah.
things that you want to remove at a time, and I'll tell you whether we can or not. Maybe we'll run a test, maybe not. And I had no problems like copying people and just being really obnoxious when like I was, when they were, I there were multiple times where like they'd send me something and I just copy and paste what they'd sent in a previous email and said, per your email,
Yeah. Yeah,
uh, we cannot
that's
do that.
important, right? That's
Oh yeah.
100% important. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's cool.
Navigating corporate is interesting, and doing it in three different countries, with people from different countries with their own cultural backgrounds is a challenge. Um,
Yeah, no, 100%.
but
As somebody who works in that space where we have JV partners from around the world, it's a big deal. So you navigated your way to Nissan, and then
yeah,
you then left and you became a systems engineer with Honeywell Aerospace.
yeah,
So, okay, noise and vibration test engineer to then systems engineer. I'm guessing systems engineer still related to noise and vibration though.
yes.
Yeah.
So what they were designing were basically struts to
Okay.
create like damping in 6 degrees of freedom on like
Yeah.
satellite parts and things that were
Okay.
going to be shot into outer space. So the
Nice.
testing I did, so I designed some stuff. I worked again with the FEA, CA guys. I ran some tests. Unfortunately, the way that Honeywell had structured themselves at that particular location is that they got paid for the hours worked by the engineers by the government. So they kind of encouraged people, sometimes demanded that people work more than 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week. And they wanted to pull projects ahead to the point that their clients wouldn't accept them because they're like, this is 2 months ahead of schedule. We do not have a place to hold this, so we're not going to take ownership of this. And they ran out of work for me to do. They sent me over to a different part of Honeywell where I um, used MATLAB and took somebody's job away from them by accident. Their whole job was to transfer data from one format to another, and I spent a week writing MATLAB code that would do it in like 10 minutes. I feel kind of bad that they probably came back from vacation.
Oh no.
they
So
probably
so
didn't
that
use it. They probably didn't use it. To be fair,
yeah.
once they came back, they probably like, that's fine. I'm gonna go back to my, to what I was doing.
Yeah.
But then I got laid off because they literally ran out of work for me to do, um, and I was the last person hired.
Yeah. So that was a short stint for you. That was 2 years. So
Yeah.
do you mind sharing why you made the jump to Honeywell in the first place? What was what was the opportunity there for you?
So part of it, I mean, it was definitely a pay increase, but the
Yeah.
biggest thing, there are two things. One, I was a contract engineer at Nissan,
Yeah.
and that means that like there are certain benefits I didn't get as a full engineer. I was paid less because I was contract. My benefits were less, um, but also when you work for product development, you often see how the sausage is made,
Hmm.
and sometimes you don't like how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
Um, so it kind of wore down on me because not
Yeah.
that anything was unsafe. It was just more like there are things that I felt were not being done the correct way, the way that
Hmm.
would probably benefit the customers the best.
Yeah.
Um, analogy that was used there that I've seen elsewhere is kind of like you have this cliff and you want to get as close to the cliff as possible, and that would be like achieving like excellence without going over. So like how close can you get without actually committing to it? And there were times where I'd be like, hey, we need to do this. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. And then 2 months later, like, oh crap, we need to do what you said. But because of where we are now, it's all bandages rather than designing it,
Yeah.
you know,
The right
which
way
is
from the beginning.
frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm very big on doing the work up front so that it's good, from the beginning rather than trying to fix it on the back end. Um, so I just between being a contract engineer and just frustrated about how things were done. And I
Yeah.
wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
But it just happens when you work for places. Um, I dubbed Honeywell, and like honestly, Honeywell was term, kind of a short term plan. Anyways, they're like, oh, this is a nice change of pace. It pays more money. It's a little
Yeah.
bit challenging. But uh, they had their own issues. As a case in
Yeah.
point, I was laid off.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah. So then you were laid off, but then okay, I looked at your LinkedIn. 2016, laid off at Honeywell. 2016, hired at Stanley Black and Decker. So what was that process like for you after coming out of the layoff? I mean, what was that? How long did it
oh
take you to find a new spot?
I would have. All right, so the funny part is that
Yeah.
I interviewed with Stanley Black and Decker before I got laid off
Okay,
because
look at you
I was
go.
bored. I was bored out of my mind, and I was like, this is horrible. Like I'm not doing what I'm actually supposed to be doing. Like, so I'm like, I started looking around. I applied to Black and Decker. Honeywell laid me off, and Black and Decker had a hiring freeze.
Oh no.
So I was just like, wait, what? So like I was just sat there. I was like, okay, I was applying for jobs, looking at places locally. I interviewed with this company out in New Jersey, and it was still vibration. What they did is they monitored like large industrial structures,
Okay.
and they had like a
Hmm.
huge um what's the word I'm looking for? Range of area that they like territories that they sent their people out. So like the main base was in New Jersey, but they were looking for somebody to like look at like Long Island and like Brooklyn area. So like I flew out there, I had an interview. It sounded really interesting. It was a small business. They had some benefits. The pay wasn't as good as I would have liked, especially since it was in New Jersey and New York. Like it was below
It's expensive.
average. I always
Yeah.
recommend looking at the medium average cost of living wherever you're going, and like what the average pay for whatever job you're looking to get. And I was like, I need a job. This job sounds interesting, but also like a pain in the butt. I'm gonna call Black and Decker. So I was like, because I've been kind of, I'm like, hey, we had this interview. It sounded like you were interested.
Yeah.
You know, I recently interviewed with a company in New Jersey. I was thinking about accepting it, and I wanted to give you the option, the opportunity to make me an offer, and they did.
Nice.
Um,
So you really kind of manifested that basically as I'm
oh,
trying to fix my
oh, I,
microphone.
I totally leveraged the other job because like I was like, hey, this is the pay, and it's like the pay was lower, but they had the benefits that kind of like so. I'm like, hey, this is the pay and benefits package. Can you do better than this? And they did. I was
Nice.
like, all right,
Nice.
excellent. So I moved to Maryland. They paid for me to relocate, or at least a chunk of that to relocate, which is nice.
Nice.
And at that time, I'd met um my wife, though she wasn't my wife yet. She moved out to Maryland with me. And I worked
Wow.
at Black and Decker for 4.5 years or so.
And they're senior noise and vibration engineer, so you were doing same thing, testing
Same thing.
vibrations.
I was the vibration person. So like
Nice.
it was their test and development portion. We had a guy that did materials testing. We had a technician that did standard testing, and my job was to fix the random problems that came up. So like, hey, we have this part that keeps flying off, and we don't know why. We've been looking at it for 2 to 3 months. Like, oh, well, I can run some tests and tell you about that, and had a solution in like a week or two.
That's
um,
awesome. So I should feel very confident operating a Stanley or Black& and Decker power tool because you were
Absolutely.
involved. Yes.
I mean, yes. I mean, not just because I was involved. There's some very smart engineers. Um, yes, DeWalt, Stanley Black and Decker, Craftsman, they're all the same.
Yeah,
The Craftsman is basically DeWalt that's like 3 or 4 years old.
yeah,
Um, it's just kind of how it progresses.
yeah.
But we don't. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they would never listen, and they'd never consider sponsoring the podcast anyway. So here's a personal question here. So at my
Sure.
university, we partnered with Goodwill Industries of San Antonio regularly, and they had this maintenance division that would come to us with their problems, and we,
Hmm.
help them do an inventory system or a system for mm, cutting labels and improving that process, or lifting and tilting Gaylord boxes to inspect them with like miniature cranes. But one of the projects that they kept on coming back to us for
Okay.
was a one hand operated chainsaw. A chainsaw that you could safely operate and dampen the vibration so that you could safely operate and safely control a chainsaw with one hand. Now, as a noise and vibration engineering expert, what do you think about that ask? Is it a reasonable ask for the human body for you to design an engineering system that can stabilize a chainsaw that it can be operated with one hand? Because we thought all of
So,
us really wanted to
uh,
that project was the project that was regularly just never picked up because none of us wanted the liability, or it was just a terrifying concept to all of us. And this was like sophomore design. So this was sophomore engineering students that had this concept pitched to them. So what do you think?
I mean, the first thought that I have is that I don't like chainsaws. Like, I
I
don't know
hate
if have you
chainsaws.
ever used a chainsaw? That,
No,
that,
because I don't like them.
so 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 they're not very. Now, I am not an expert in them by any means, so please don't like anybody come after me for this. But in general, like you have a chain that's rotating around and it has to be oiled, and the reason why a lot of them have two hands is because it's a safety thing. You have to squeeze one thing, before you can turn it on, so you have control over it.
Yeah,
Um, if if you're looking for a one-handed chainsaw, so something that is small enough to hold in one hand that can still cut with what you're looking for, I believe that's called a reciprocating saw. They have a little blade that goes on, so like,
yeah,
and those can be designed so that it doesn't have too much vibration. You put a counterbalance in it. You put different blades in it. Like Black and Decker was doing a whole bunch of like how do you design the best blade so that it cuts out the perfect amount so that you get the most bang for your buck. So a reciprocating saw is way better than a chainsaw, especially if you're trying to do it one-handed. So
yeah.
that's my take on it.
So
Is that
don't
there is a
modify a
fix to
chainsaw
it.
to use one hand.
Don't modify. Yeah, just use a reciprocating saw that's designed for one hand.
Okay, I'm gonna clip that and send that to the head of our engineering department. I'll be like, "Dear Dr. Arminian, love y'all lots. Why was this a project?" And no, I love my engineering department. I
Yeah.
strong advocate for the program, and I do my
Oh,
best
for
to
sure.
connect their students with jobs and all that stuff. But that was just so funny, and I look back on that. I'm like, and even at the time, we were like, "Come on, this is a crazy concept." So back to the dude. We've had
Yeah.
more dovetails than a dove. We a dove more dovetails than the King Ranch. So you were there for 4 years,
A little over four. Yeah.
2016 to 2020, a little over 4 years.
Yeah.
What was your progression while you were there for 4 years? Was it kind of just the same specialist role, or did you kind of grow into it? I mean, what was your what was your experience like being there? Because you were there for 4 years, and you talk about it very, very highly. So I'm just curious what that experience was like for you.
So like, yeah, I mean, it was really funny because they hired me on as a senior engineer,
Hmm.
but apparently when they did the paperwork for it, I might not have actually been hired on as a senior engineer because then I got a promotion like halfway through as to a senior engineer, which is funny because I was making senior engineering money. Like, sure,
Yes,
that's
please
fine.
create another tier for me to make even more money. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. So, like in most things, I feel like it takes about a year or two to really get comfortable with things. Like you find the ins and outs of things, you work on projects, and a lot of times projects repeat or problems repeat. So like after like the first 2 years, like I had enough background to go like, oh, I remember working on something similar. Let's look at this. Or, hey, like I know how things are going to work. I recommend that we approach this in X way.
Hmm.
Um, so like it was fun. I liked working there. I liked working with most of the people there. Um, Once again, same issue that I had at Nissan in that there are things that kind of popped up that are just like, I'm not really a fan of how this is, but like it's especially when you have something where you have like a low, medium, high tier like product disbursement. Yeah, you're not going to
Yeah.
put the same amount of money you put in your bottom end drill as you put in your top end drill. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just kind of how it works. Um, so yeah, it was interesting. It was definitely and like and getting and working with people and like working with the project team so that like once you show them, hey, like look, I can fix this problem. One time they come back to you and say, hey, I had this other problem, and I love like finding out like why something's breaking or like what the design issue was, and so,
Yeah.
is it a design issue or is it a build issue or did manufacturing do something weird? You know, I probably would have stayed longer, um, but the pandemic hit and we worked from home, and that was fine. I'd work from home and go into the office to run tests and come back home and process data, when I didn't need to be in the office.
Yeah.
But Black and Decker decided that we were going to work, cut our hours by 20%. So we didn't work on Fridays, which was fine, except for the fact that we didn't make that money. And then they had record profits. And then they paid out like millions of dollars to their stockholders. And I
Yeah.
just really felt really unhappy about that.
Yeah. That
Um,
makes sense. Yeah.
they were talking about trying to like reduce costs over like the next 2 years by like $10 million, and then the 10 million. It was no, it wasn't 10. It was like 50 million. It was a large number, but then they gave out like a fifth of that to their stockholders and like dividends, and it's just like wait. Wait a second.
Wait,
You're
I
gonna
took a
make money
20%
off,
pay cut for that.
right? For that, yeah, basically, yeah. Well, and they let go of their a couple divisions that they were ahead of. Like, oh, we're gonna lay them off. They can get money. We'll hire them back when we need them because we're ahead of the competitors. And then all those people found jobs elsewhere because why would they wait around?
Yeah.
So that was a frustrating thing, and I also had a slight issue with my manager, or not my manager. My manager was great. My previous manager, who became director,
Yeah.
shifted a lot of work onto me. That
Yeah.
was his, without actually clearly communicating that.
Yeah.
Um, and then and when I didn't do what he wanted to do, he stopped talking to me, which was very weird and toxic. Like
Yeah.
not like I'd walk into a room and he would suddenly turn his body away from me and not acknowledge that I walked into the room. And like
Yeah.
you would think that maybe I'm just kind of paranoid that I'm making this up, except for uh previously he had commented how he likes to screw with people by doing this, by not talking to them. So
Yeah,
like
that's
I'm like
not
I'm like
good.
this
Cultural,
isn't
not a
good.
cultural fit anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it really like is a good portion of it was the manager, and then the rest of it was some of the decisions that they made. So I switched over to Simutech, which is a smaller company that has me doing jobs all over the place.
Yeah. So you left R&D, which I think that it was one of those things that you kind of observed the same cultural things that you didn't
Yeah.
like, and then you moved over to Simutek, which is consulting. So how's that switch into the consulting space been for you?
So it's still kind of R&D. It's
Okay.
just I'm not in charge of the projects anymore. So I don't see the same projects all the time. Um, but it's interesting. I
Yeah.
a little bit to be fair, a little bit lacking in that consulting questions are usually not as deep as internal questions, right? So a lot of like our testing that we provide is for companies that don't have test departments, right?
Hmm.
Or they need overflow. So the questions that they're asking are maybe not as complicated
Hmm.
as questions I would have as an internal customer, right? Hey, I have this one thing that's breaking off, a bunch. How do we fix it? Whereas like a customer that comes to us who's like, hey, we're noticing that something is failing, you know, but we don't really have a lot of information about it. It happens occasionally. It seems to happen, maybe when it's colder outside, but we're not really sure. So we don't
Yeah.
have as much information. So they don't have the same internal structure to kind of track those problems and dig
Yeah.
into them, which is what they ask us. Um, but it is interesting in that I get to work on a bunch of different things. And this job has sent me into nuclear power plants, gas, coal power plants. I've been to the top of inside wind turbines, into the blades of wind turbines, and install sensors.
Nice.
Um, Working on solar panels. I've done stuff on planes where I've taken vibration data on jets, um, as well as like beard trimmers and baggage scanners, like a
So
little bit of
cool.
everything.
Yeah.
So and like that is the breadth of work is really interesting. But I do the there is the added complication of the fact that the job is also at the whim and scheduling of the customer. So a
Yeah.
lot of times things don't happen when they're supposed to happen. Like, oh, we're going to schedule this the first week in March, and then it ends up being randomly the second week in May. And you don't
Yeah.
find out until the first week in May that that's when it's actually going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
It,
know.
it it definitely consulting is one of those industries where your life kind of can get because that's when
Oh
they
yeah.
need you, right? Yeah. That's
Oh
when they
yeah.
need you.
And
Yeah.
like, and I thought it was cool with that. But I have a 18 month at home, my
Yeah.
first kiddo, and I don't like being away randomly. So I actually gave my like 2 weeks notice last Friday, so I have
Oh
a
my
week left.
gosh.
Yeah, I got another job,
Yeah.
um, locally in Rochester, at an aerospace company doing the same thing, noise and vibration testing. I'm actually not entirely sure what the job is entailing, not because I don't know. How do I put this? So like I don't do any analysis afterwards because they have somebody to do that. They have
Hmm.
somebody to do simulation and like to put the sensors on because this is going to outer space and it's going in a clean room. Like that's done off site. So I'm like, you're telling me I'm only doing like 30% of the job, like, and reading a lot of test procedures. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm like, oh, that's easy.
Yeah. That's cool. Man, I did not even know that. I mean, I guess when we
Yeah,
booked this
yeah,
interview, you hadn't even put in your notice yet.
yeah,
So, wow, that
yeah.
that is I could tell you were going somewhere with that, and I'm just complete. This is a engineering success podcast first, uh, broadcasting your resignation for the first time to the world on my podcast. Breaking, it's basically like LeBron James is the decision, but it's on the engineering success podcast.
Sure,
that is
yeah.
that is something, and I totally get it, man. I totally get it. I've lived in San Antonio happily for the last 7 years, and now I'm in New Orleans. So
Right. Well,
I totally get it, man.
yeah,
And even this is easier because at least I'm here. And as somebody who
right.
we're expecting our first kid in less than 2 months, I totally understand not wanting to be away. I totally get that. So that's really could man. So how'd you that was the decision point. I'm caught off guard to be honest. So but it sounds like you're
Sorry.
excited for it. No, you're good. It sounds like
Ah,
you're excited for it.
so I'm not entirely sure how excited I am for it. So I moved up to Rochester for this job that I currently have with every intention of staying at this job for years to
Mhm.
come. And there was a cultural shift from working remotely because I was working remotely for like the first 2 years at this job. Um, and which worked out really well because my wife is pregnant and then we had our first kid and there were complications. So I was able to be home to assist while also working. and like also like be a parent all around. So like, even when even though I left for work to travel, like I was still like when I was working from home, like I could have lunch with my kiddo. I could,
Yeah.
go upstairs and like, watch her for, 15 minutes while my wife did stuff during the middle of the day. But when I moved up to Rochester, the expectations were not clearly conveyed to me.
Yeah.
And it's just been kind of a struggle. And the new job I'm excited for. I have every confidence that I can do the job. I'm really happy about it. But to be fair, I'm happier that I negotiated. Well, the recruiter was amazing. I have a decent pay bump with a sign-on bonus that I wasn't even expecting. Um, but I also negotiated that even though I gave my 2 weeks notice last Friday, which means that next Friday is my last day at my current job, I don't start at my new job until July 10th. So
Ah, it's gonna be great. Yeah.
I have not taken like I've not had time off in between jobs really. Like I keep saying I'm going to do it, and then every job's like we need you to stay longer, and the other job's like we need you right away. So it's like
Yeah.
well, boom, like I just kept going and going and going, and even when I'm my current job, because of the nature of consulting, like I don't know the last time I had a time off where I was not like also randomly pulled into a phone call or like Yep, yep. Even when I was moving up to Rochester, I was trying to write a report on something. So like I supposed to be time off, like driving up to Rochester from Baltimore. My all my stuff is in a pack rat coming up. I have a U-Haul, two dogs, a baby, and my wife in the car. Drive up, sign the papers for the house that we just bought. Move in, drive into the house, and I'm like the next day trying to work on this report. And just trying
Yeah.
to juggle things. So like I am looking forward to having some time off, settle into my house a little bit more,
Yeah.
get into a routine.
That's
And
exciting.
the
And
new job, the new job also has like a weird like 80 hours and 9 day schedule. So every other Friday I should
yeah.
have off, which means that every other Friday is a 3-day weekend. And
Yeah.
I'm happy about that too.
Yeah. I think we call those 980s is what we call them.
Yeah, 980s, yeah.
Yeah, our engineering partner on our current project, they all work 980s, which is cool, but at the field we work 510s. So every other Friday we don't have any input from our engineering partner, so it's a little bit okay. No, no. What actually happens is they still work. Sucks for them that they don't get their benefit, but we really appreciate them. Uh, but yeah, man, that's cool. That's exciting. I'm happy for you. So you've had a really, I'd say, normal career progression. You've had one, two, three, four or five companies. You've changed jobs
Mm,
every 2 to 4 years, 5 years.
yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty normal career progression. So, as a person that's currently a lifer, what would you say to somebody that has not taken the leap yet and leaving their current employer? What would you do to give them that? What would you say to them to kind of give them that confidence that yeah, they can land a new job. They can move on to the next thing.
So, so I most of the time I had a job lined up.
Yeah.
So I left Nissan for Honeywell, Black and Decker for Simitech for the next job.
Yeah.
But so my wife makes laughs at me because I like to do analogies, and a lot of the analogies are like work is like a relationship, like it's
Yeah.
dating, and like sometimes if you're dating somebody or in a relationship with somebody, it's no longer what is best for you, and you can stick it out, but you really should ask yourself why. It made sense years ago when like companies took care of the people and you got benefit for staying with them for 20, 30 years, but like there's no retirement plans now. 401k, you can get that anywhere. Health insurance, you can get that, most places. So in general, and it's every interview I've had, I was like, you treat me right, I'll stick around. Usually Usually the thing that kind of pushed me over the edge had more to do with like some like interpersonal thing that was just like, I was this other stuff kind of sucked, but I was kind of sticking out, for whatever reason, and now I'm like, I don't feel like I can do that anymore because it's just kind of. So what would I recommend? It's just like dating. There's always somebody else out there, and every relationship that you have leads you to your next relationship. You learn things about yourself, and this is important. It is really hard to ask somebody who's never dated anybody, what is your ideal partner, right? It's very difficult. Like you have some very general ideas, but once you've been dating and you're like, what do you want? They're like, oh, well, this or that. But if you ask them what they don't want, they go, oh, well, I dated this one person, they did this thing, and I don't like that. And I dated this other person, and they, there's all these red flags, so I look for that now. Same thing for work. What is your ideal work environment? I would have said Simitech was ideal. I love the idea of the projects and whatnot, but then the travel and whatnot became too much. But with every job you have, you learn what you don't want. It's a lot easier to kind of chip away and say, I don't want this, I don't want that. And what is revealed underneath is what you actually would work best for you. And what works best for you is not going to be the same thing that works best for somebody else. You know. So if you're if you're working for a job and you're like, I don't like it here. I'm not happy here anymore. It's not bringing me joy. It doesn't spark joy anymore. You know, then go ahead. Well, what don't you like about that job? And can you
Yeah,
find someplace that doesn't have those things? You know, and then try
exactly.
that. And then
Yeah.
if there are different things that you don't like, okay, well now the next job I'm going to try something else. Like after Nissan, I was like, I'm not going to do commercial stuff because like I can't, I don't want to know how the sausage is made. After Black, I was like, then I worked at Black and Decker. I'm like, okay, this isn't too bad, but then also like, so I need to stay out of commercial
Yeah.
because I just know that like for me personally, it wears on me. Not that they're
Yeah.
doing anything wrong. I want to be very clear to your listeners. It's safe. You can definitely buy them. Don't come and sue me, Black and Decker. It's just more of a it's just more of a
Yeah. It's a grueling
I am
process
particular.
trying to find that line between maximizing profits and doing the right thing and doing and fighting for the right thing, but also maximizing profits. I totally
Right,
understand. It grinds on you if you're one of the people that is part of that process of going back and forth and optimizing both
right.
goals.
And as
So I
somebody that was
totally get
working
it.
at working specifically on a specific thing, right? So like noise and vibration, right? Then like from my perspective, like, hey, like why wouldn't we fix this? And I
Yeah.
understand, oh, there's costs and there's other things, but like I keep seeing the same problem. Why are we not, addressing this specific thing? It'd be so easy. Um,
Yeah.
so like, aerospace, I worked for Honeywell. I was like, I'm not going to work for aerospace again because Honeywell had some weird things. But it could just be that Honeywell was a bad company. So now I'm working in a different aerospace company and they seem what I learned from Honeywell, like, hey, like, we want you to work 50 hours a week until somebody asked them whether or not it was legal to work 50 hours, demand that their people work 50 hours a week. Like, oh, well, work as much as you need to. But 98% of all your work has to be billable hours. So if you take
Yeah.
vacation time, that's not billable hours. So you have to make up your vacation time, which
Yeah.
is really. So, like, when I had the interview with this current company, I was like, hey, this is my experience with aerospace. Like, I'm laying it right on the table. Is this your expectation? Like, is this how this works here? They're like, oh, that's weird. No, no, we don't do that. I'm like, oh, good. I am glad that you agree that this is also not great. You know.
Yeah.
So going back to I bringing in my tangent here. Yeah, if you're thinking about leaving, I highly recommend seeing what's available. There's so much out there right now. So many people, so many companies are hiring. Um, I watch TikToks, and there was one TikTok that was like, if you match up with all of the expectations of whatever job that's out there, you are overqualified.
Yeah.
Most job requirements are a wish list. They're like they probably want half of what you want, of what's on there, and like you can learn it. You can
Mhm.
definitely learn it if you have the experience and the education. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. So we've run through your career, we've run through
Yeah.
your education. So I
Sure.
just kind of want to we kind of have told the story of how you got here, and I think it's a really cool story, and it's a story that surprisingly I haven't really gotten the chance to tell on my podcast. So I'm really thankful that you've come on and told your story and been very candid and very open about your experience. From that experience, are there any other, if you're talking to a kid that's in high school that's dreaming about becoming an engineer, or you're talking to an early college student that's about to take their second or third prereq and they're getting started in it, what do you have any advice or anything that you learned along the way that you think is super important that they understand or I don't know, just any, it's kind of I'm putting it up
No,
on
no,
that
no, no,
dangerous
no.
platform where you can say whatever you want.
So, like a couple thoughts come to mind. The first
Yeah.
is, definitely go with what sparks joy with you. You
Yeah.
know, if for me, chemistry was not my thing. It's too messy. I don't like the fact that like it's not like gravity. Like, yes, it is, formulaic, but you know, I like my physics. I like my nice controlled, Um, so like if you find something that you are interested in, then go for it. Um, for sure. I had another thought. It was a good one. It was excellent. Uh,
Early
your question was
career,
what would
early
you?
engineering, early high school, thinking about just any
Oh
general
yes.
advice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the best thing I can recommend is you don't have to learn everything at once.
Yeah.
So if you go to a conference, if you go into a class, or you're having a conversation, don't expect to remember everything. If you
Yeah.
try to remember everything or try to learn everything at once, you won't remember any of it. So if you can, pick one, two, three major themes, topics, whatever it is, and just pull that out and focus on those things. You know, it's amazing how that will be helpful. Maybe it won't be as exact as like, hey, like, did you memorize this formula? But when you have a conversation and you're trying to develop a project, you have a prototype or something along those lines, and you're having all this information thrown at you, the ability to sit down and say, okay, hold on. From what I'm hearing, these are the three things that are most important. Let's talk about
Yeah.
those three things and address those three things. And now, once those three things are, we can come back and say, all right, what are the next three things that we need to attack? Um, because there have been so many meetings that I've been in so many meetings where so much is going on that nothing is happening, or we just
Yeah.
stall because everybody is just, there's too much information, there's choice paralysis, we're trying to change too many things at once. Well, what if we're going to make this next iteration, so let's add everything we can
Yeah.
and not be aware of how all that adding will affect it. So being able to say, hey, no, let's focus on these three things, or these two things, and address those things, and then move on. And like I said, for the most part, like engineering classes teach you how to think, and they put the world into a framework. And sometimes you need to know those formulas, but sometimes you just need to know the concepts. So focusing on those big overarching concepts
Yeah.
and then applying those thoughts to the problems at hand will be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I think it's applicable to school. I think that's the way you should study is studying for looking for the big concepts. And so what do I need to know here to be able to solve problems? And I think it's completely applicable in the business world. And I think that's the essence of really being an engineer, really is being able to look at a situation, identify what the problems are, the major critical things are that need to be solved, and then being able to guide the team through the process of solving that problem. And I think that engineering school when you have to study for exams that are not the same as the homework, which at first you're like,
Yeah.
oh, why? Why would the exam problems be different from the homework? Well, because you have to understand things. You have to understand things. But from that to being in a business setting when you have a team of engineers that are scrambling and they're like, oh, well, this is going wrong, this is going wrong, this is going wrong. Okay, break it down. What's the
Right.
fundamental issue? I think that is sage advice, and I think it's so applicable from high school to college and all the way through. And I I really appreciate the way you broke it down that way.
Oh, my pleasure.
And seriously, thank you so much for hopping on and giving up an hour and yeah, an hour and a half now. Oh my gosh, we've been on for a while. An hour and a half of your evening and hopping onto the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure on my end, and I'm
Yeah.
really grateful that you've done it. I just I'll give you one last platform. Anything else you have to say, or anything else you want to share?
uh, um, what else do I have to say?
I know I'm going way open ended here, but you just have
Oh,
so many
you
good
are like,
thoughts. Yeah, you can just say thank you
so
and say bye.
I will give you one more bit of advice. All right, this is coming out from like way left field. Um, so if you're an engineer and you have in the engineering world, you interact with a lot of people. You interact with other engineers. You interact with business people. Being able to communicate with everybody is very important. But I do want to say that one group of people that is often overlooked or undervalued are technicians.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference. Like there are things that like I have mad respect for technicians because there's stuff that they can do that I cannot do or would not want to do, and I am just impressed that they can. Um, and I have worked with engineers that talk down to technicians, who think down, that just snub technicians. And I think that if you're a good engineer, a decent human being, like you would not do that. So my last bit of sage advice here is treat everybody kindly, but definitely treat your technicians well, because at the end of the day, if you're working with technicians, they have your back. And why would you be rude to somebody that is bolstering you up?
Yeah. That's great advice. Well, thank you, Tyler. I really appreciate your time on the podcast. This has been an absolute blast, and I just
Yeah,
really
it's been
appreciate your
great.
time.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Engineering Success Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this interview with Tyler, and I hope you did too. If you enjoyed it, consider supporting the podcast on Anchor or Patreon. Also, you can support the podcast. The best way you can support it is by commenting below if you're watching on YouTube, or sharing the podcast with other people that you think would benefit from it. Our target audience is high schoolers, early college students, and early career engineers that are looking to get a start in the career and the wonderful world and opportunities in engineering. And I hope that you found this podcast helpful. Thank you so much, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.
Never losing focus because I ain't chasing payments. Still playing in the basement while I'm working on arrangements. They heard the kid in 50 countries, thank God that's amazing. But I'd rather thank Spotify, they put me on the station.